Hi, my name is Cindy Scharschmidt, and I'm the Director of Student Fellowships and Study Abroad in the Office of Global Affairs at the University of Washington, Tacoma. I'm excited to talk to you about the personal statement today. And I want to give credit where credit is due because this workshop was not developed just by me. In fact, it was adapted from a workshop we originally developed at Drexel University with my colleagues Rachel Wenrick and Rona Buckhalter at the time. This will be a slightly interactive workshop, meaning that I'll have a few questions and activities spread throughout. And I actually want you to take a moment to think about the following question. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear personal statement? And I encourage you to pause the video to take a moment to reflect on this question. So I know that a lot of students find the personal statement somewhat anxiety-inducing because it is not a type of writing that you practice every day like you might be doing with academic writing in your courses. What I'm hoping to do with this tutorial is to take some of that anxiety away and hopefully create some excitement around writing a personal statement and to help put in place some strategies for how to get started and to think about conceptually what is it that you're trying to do with a personal essay or personal statement and how do you best accomplish that goal. Like I said, there will be a few interactive elements to this personal statement workshop. The hope is that you'll walk away from this tutorial with a few ideas for your personal essay. So let's talk a little bit about what the personal statement is not. It may sound counterintuitive to start with this, but I still welcome you to join me in this. The personal essay is not a resume or a CV in paragraph form. It also is not the same as a cover letter. And it's not the same as a journal or a diary entry. So why not? The resume or CV is a place where you talk about your educational, your professional accomplishments, extracurricular activities, and it's usually listing a lot of different experiences that you've had, but in a very short and abbreviated way. You don't have space in a personal statement to talk about all of those experiences. Also, relatedly, the cover letter is a document that you typically write when you apply for an internship or a job opportunity, and it tends to highlight your academic or professional fit with the opportunity at hand, but it doesn't really talk about you as the person. It's also not the same as a journal or a diary entry because those types of texts are typically incredibly personal and not intended for an external audience. Right? So keep that in mind when you set out to write your personal essay. So what is it? It is truly an investigation of yourself. What do we mean by that? It really is an opportunity to think about who you are and what along the way has shaped who you are as a person today. What are you passionate about? And where do those passions or that passion originate from? What truly sets you apart from other people around you? We all have a unique story to tell, and it might take a little digging to find out what that story is, and the personal statement is a great opportunity to do some of that digging. Personal statements do also have a strong element of time. You're reflecting on past experiences and giving us a sense, again, of who you are now as a result of those important and impactful experiences that you've had in the past. And they're written for an external purpose. And this is the important difference between a personal essay and, say, a journal entry, which is not typically intended to be read by anybody besides you. So let's think about for a moment who actually is reading this personal statement. The answer to this question is that it depends. It depends on what it is that you're writing this personal statement for. So my number one advice is to find out as best as you can who your audience is going to be. And this will look different whether or not you're applying to graduate school, if you're applying to study abroad, or if you are applying for a competitive fellowship. And it really is important to consider who your audience is, not because you want to write what you think your audience wants to hear, but to think about, all right, so, how can I connect to my readers in a way that makes sense given what I know about them? And quite honestly, a personal statement that you write for a graduate school versus a fellowship versus a different type of opportunity is going to look different, right? Because the things that you want to highlight about yourself in a particular application will depend on some extent to the selection criteria at hand. I also encourage you to keep in mind the review context. Your reviewers, no matter the opportunity, will read lots and lots and lots of applications. And they often only have a handful of fellowships or spots in a graduate program to give. Your job with the personal statement is to connect with your audience and to stand out from the rest of the application pool. Keep in mind that at this stage in the application process, the only way that you connect with your reviewers or with your reader is via your application material. Sometimes there is an interview at a later point in the selection process, but typically in the initial stage, there's only written materials. And so the personal statement really is taking the place of a personal interview, right? This is your opportunity to introduce yourself as a person, as a fellow human being. And in order to do that, your job is to tell a story. I'm going to put up here this quote by Tim O'Brien that is taken from a, I think, excellent book that he wrote called The Things They Carried. And so the quote reads as follows: "Stories are for joining the past to the future. Stories are for those late hours in the night when you can't remember how you got from where you were to where you are. Stories are for eternity, when memory is erased, when there's nothing to remember except the story." Take a moment to reflect on this quote. What about it stands out to you, and why do you think I've included it in this tutorial about personal statements? Tim O'Brien talks about the importance of storytelling as a way to connect us as human beings. And that is what you're hoping to do when you write a personal essay, is to build those relationships with your reviewers by telling your personal story. In order to further explain what we mean by telling a story, I'm going to refer to Vivian Gornick, who wrote The Art of the Personal Narrative and differentiates between the situation and the story. So bear with me. When we talk about describing a situation, you're typically merely describing something that happened. For example, I biked across the United States. I finished my undergraduate education while also being a parent to 2 young children and working part-time. Those are just 2 examples, right? You're just describing a situation, but you're not giving us a whole lot of detail of how that experience of either biking across the country or that experience of raising children while being a student and working part-time has shaped you. And so what differentiates a story from a situation is to really tell your reader how you have been impacted or shaped by that experience. What sorts of insight or wisdom have you gained from that experience? So really reflecting on the experience and giving us a sense of who you've become and what it is that you've understood about the world as a result of that experience. And it doesn't matter what the experience that you're describing is, as long as you give us some context for why that experience was meaningful in your own development. Like we talked about, the strongest personal statements have a time element. It talks about where you came from and where you're headed. And a colleague of mine at a different university has called these the arrows of inevitability. So you're talking about significant life decisions in your past. Maybe where did you alter your path significantly, or what life decisions you've made in the past that have shaped who you are in the present, right? So what is your motivation, your inspiration? Why is it that you want to do what you want to do? And then often you do give us a sense of where you're headed in the future vis-a-vis either the fellowship that you're applying to with this personal statement or the graduate program that you're applying to. So why does this next step make sense to you in your long-term trajectory? This time element connects both past experiences, talks about who you are in the present moment, and then gives us a sense of who you want to be in the future as a result of whatever opportunity that you're applying for. And now it's your time to do some work. And this time, for real, I would like for you to pause this video tutorial. And what I want you to do is to take out either a piece of paper or pull out your laptop if you haven't already, open a Word document, and create this table that you see here in front of you. And the table should have 4 columns, one for family and friends, one for academics, one for work, and then an other miscellaneous category. And then what I want you to do is to think of 3 stories from each of these areas of your life. So again, these would be meaningful experiences that you've had in the context of your family and friends, your academic accomplishments, your professional life, and then you can use that other category to share experiences that you have had that don't neatly fit into these other categories. So take about 10 minutes to write down sort of a tentative or a working title for those experiences, and then a couple of details for each of them. I know that you're looking at this video tutorial most likely on your own at your computer or phone, so it might be hard to do this second part of the exercise, but I still encourage you to try. Usually when I do this workshop in person, I pair students that are participating to talk about one of the experiences that you just brainstormed. And so if you're looking at this on your own, then I would encourage you to find a friend or a family member and to see if they'd be willing to listen to one of your experiences from the list that you just created. And what I want you to do is to really dig deep and tell the story of that experience. Not just describe what happened to you, but also give us a sense of, again, how that experience has shaped you and how that experience has impacted you in the long term. Once you have done that, here's your homework. And of course, I have no way of checking whether or not you're doing your homework, but I really encourage you to do this as a next step if you are working on a personal statement. Go back to the list of stories that you created. If you listed 3 stories per column, then you likely have a total of 12. And so think about the opportunity that you're applying for and the selection criteria, and then pick 2 or 3 of the stories from the list that you created and take about 10 minutes to write them out. And the reason I tell you to take only 10 minutes is so that you don't get wedded to a particular idea too early in the process. I see this a lot where students think that there's just one version of your personal statement that you keep telling, but think about this as an opportunity to start from scratch and do a 10-minute free write and see where it takes you. Sometimes what looks like a great idea initially actually doesn't yield enough material to really be turned into a full-on personal statement. Give it a try, but don't spend too much time on it just yet. And once you've spent 10 minutes doing this free write, you will have a better sense of whether or not they are appropriate for the personal statement that you're trying to write. I also wanted to answer some of the frequently asked questions I receive about personal statements. The first one is, how do I get started? You're often faced with the infamous blank page and can be incredibly hard to get started on a personal essay. Hopefully, the writing exercise that you did earlier today will be helpful in generating some ideas. If that didn't work, one of the strategies that I have seen to be very successful is to actually talk to people about your personal background. This could be people that you know well or people who you just met, and to basically have conversations about meaningful experiences in those different areas of your life rather than trying to write. Sometimes that can surface some ideas that you can then utilize in your personal statement. Just make sure that either you or the person that you're talking to takes some notes while you talk. How do I decide what's appropriate to share in a personal statement? That's a good question. Sometimes an experience can be too personal or even too scary to share in a personal statement. Ultimately, this is your decision. You are the best judge of what's appropriate to include in a personal statement. If you're at all concerned about whether or not it's appropriate to share an experience of yours, especially one that has been challenging, feel free to talk to somebody, a trusted mentor, an advisor, about whether or not that kind of information is worth including in the personal statement that you're writing. If you do decide to write about a rather challenging experience, I strongly encourage that you emphasize how you've grown and changed as a result of the experience and how you've overcome that challenge, rather than explaining in great detail what the challenge itself was. Because the resiliency that you had to demonstrate in order to overcome a challenging situation is actually something that can be quite useful in the context of applying for a competitive fellowship or for graduate school. And it will demonstrate to your readers that you are not going to back down at the first sign of challenge. How long should the personal essay be? It's also a question I hear quite frequently, and I would say take a look at the requirements for the opportunity that you're applying for. Sometimes or often there is a page limit. I often see one page as the limit, but please double check the graduate school application or the fellowship application to clarify how long your personal essay should in fact be. What are some common mistakes that you see in personal statements? Well, there are quite a few. I'd say the number one thing is that students try to cram too much information into the personal statement. Your job is to be concise and to fit your personal essay in the allotted space. And that usually means you have to be judicious about what experience you include and which ones you'll leave out. Keep in mind that there's often other parts of the application where you are able to share some of your other experiences and or accomplishments, right? So you don't have to fit it all into the personal statement. The other common mistake I see is that a personal statement often reads too much like a resume or CV in narrative form. This is a personal essay. This is supposed to introduce you as the person, not just you the professional or the student. So keep in mind that you're investigating yourself and sharing some of your more personal experiences in this essay. And then another common mistake I see is that the personal statement is actually not enough about you. Now that might seem counterintuitive, but let me explain what I mean. A lot of students start out by talking about, for example, their parents or grandparents and the impact they have or the influence they've had on your own development. And while that is important to consider and important to share, make sure that when you decide to open your personal statement in that way, that you don't devote more than a few sentences to your family history. This is a personal statement about you, not about your family members. And I completely realize that a lot of times family does have a pretty outsized influence in shaping who you have become, but you have to walk that fine balance between, yes, talking about the people who have influenced you, but then also making sure that you talk about you as a person and who you've become as a result of that influence. And then the last question I wanted to address is, how many drafts do I write of this personal statement? Now, it probably goes without saying that writing just one draft is not going to cut it. Both graduate school and fellowships are incredibly competitive, and you want to make sure that you put forth your best possible work. And the way to ensure that is to make sure that you write multiple drafts and that you get multiple reviewers for each of those drafts. That's an important process for any kind of writing. And while you may not always have time for drafts and reviews in the context of your academic writing, I really strongly encourage that you take that time, that you give yourself that time when you write a personal essay. The first draft is never good. In fact, there is a writer named Annie Lamond who has written a chapter about the shitty first draft and acknowledging that even professional writers' first drafts are never good. So never ever submit your first draft, and please make sure that you work with multiple readers for feedback. Now sometimes that can be challenging because if you give your personal essay to multiple readers, that can mean that you get conflicting feedback. That's fine. That's part of the learning process. And at the end of the day, you're in charge, right? You're the writer, you're the author of this personal statement. And so ultimately you decide what advice to heed and what to discard. Again, can be challenging, but it's part of the learning process. And if you're applying for a fellowship, we're here to help. If you are applying for a fellowship, then we're here to help you in this process. We're available for one-on-one meetings. We're available to offer writing support for your personal essays and other types of writing, but again, only in the context of fellowship applications. We can strategize for letters of recommendation, and we help facilitate campus interviews for those fellowships that require them. If you're applying for graduate school or any other kind of opportunity that requires a personal statement, I want to point out a couple of other writing resources on campus that you can utilize. The first one is our Teaching and Learning Center. You've likely already made use of this resource for one of your class assignments or maybe multiple ones, but they have terrific writing consultants that are trained and available to work with you on all types of writing assignments, including the personal essay. As you likely know, you can schedule both in-person and online meetings with the writing consultants at our Teaching and Learning Center. If you are working on a resume, a CV, or a cover letter, then our colleagues in the Career Development Office are another great resource. They're available for scheduled appointments, but they also have career prep consultants that are available for drop-in advising several times a week to review resumes, CVs, and cover letters. The schedule is available on the Career Development website. Here's contact information for the Student Fellowships and Awards Unit in the Office of Global Affairs. Our website is tacoma.uw.edu/scholar. We can be reached at tscholar@uw.edu via email. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, and we're located in GWP 102. A quick note about our YouTube channel. We have posted there a number of fellowship-related video tutorials, both an intro to fellowships tutorial that talks about what fellowships are and how to go about identifying a good fit for you, but then also video tutorials about individual fellowships like the Tillman Military Scholarship, the Udall Scholarship, and others. And so really, I encourage you to check us out. The YouTube channel is called UW Tacoma Fellowships. Thank you, and best of luck.